A mother and a son out on a long road trip find themselves coming face to face with a bizarre entity. And then we take a look at another story involving a young mother and her son. But they are on no fun road trip. In fact, the only destination they're headed towards is straight to hell. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. Hope you guys are having a great day too. Hope you guys are having tons of fun doing whatever you're doing. We got a lot of stuff to cover today. So first off, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command, bringing packages from Amazon. Everyone get on your feet and give it up for Fred Foley. Woohoo! Yeah, yeah, he's giving us. He's like, these packages are heavy. Quit clapping. Help me with them. We grab these boxes. Fred Foley recently got me some stuff off my Amazon wish list. Really appreciate this. He got me a book called Primal Branding. It's a marketing book. It's like how to turn people into zealots. They're like, Jason, that's the last thing you need. This show is always on the edge of becoming a full-time cult. Each of you are ministers of the mysterious. Actually, dude, that is a great tagline. How come I never thought of that before? You are the ministers of the mysterious. You help me spread the word, definitely. Primal Branding. He also got me a stack. Sabine told me not to bring this up. She's like, don't bring this up, but I'm going to have a hard time thinking about it. I got this book, and then I also got a stack of 50 meal prep kits. So, like you can prep your meals, you can cook stuff ahead of time, and you put it in these little kits. It's like plastic trays with lids. Now, I'll be honest, I don't remember putting that on my wish list. Maybe he goes, well, it'll be better for you to eat food. It'll be better to eat food in small portions that you can carry around. Yeah, it will. I'll definitely find a use for them. I was like, if I had some G.I. Joes, I would turn these into boats. Yeah, I could prep some meals. I don't know how they ended up on there, Fred. Maybe you chose them. Maybe you're just like, he sounds like a guy who could prep his meals. He's a busy man running the ministry of the mysterious. But thank you. Thank you so much for the book and the meal prep kits. I really appreciate it, Fred. And that is why you are going to be our captain or pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially, if you guys can't buy gifts off the Amazon wish list, it's totally fine. It really is. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. Fred, let's go ahead and break out the Dead Rabbit Dune Buggy. Everyone climb on board this bad boy as Fred fires it up. We're leaving behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Why don't you drive us all the way out to an elementary school? As we're headed out there, I want to do a quick reminder. Port Gamble Ghost Conference is coming up November 8th through November 10th, 2024. But even if I wasn't, I'd still be going to check it out. It's a fantastic ghost conference in Port Gamble, Washington. The whole town's haunted. Great event hosted by Pete Orbea, I believe is how you pronounce his name. But, with me, I don't know a lot of how to pronounce stuff. Port Gamble Ghost Conference, November 8th through the 10th. Go to portgamble.com for more information. That link will also be in the show notes. Fred is driving us out to this elementary school. Luckily, we have all of these meals prepared. I was like, I hope you guys like turkey burgers that were cooked 2 days ago and been sitting in the fridge with a little bit of unsalted green beans. I love that stuff. Anyways, we're headed all the way out to this elementary school. It's the early 2000s. We're going to meet this young kid. Let's call him Ben. It's the early 2000s. Ben and his mother are driving down the road. They're actually headed to a soccer game that's far away. I'm assuming he's like a player. I thought they took buses, but maybe, I don't know. I don't know nothing about sports. I don't know if he's a player or if he's really dedicated to watching soccer, that he's like, Mom, we got to go on this road trip to watch the soccer game. Whatever the case is, is they're driving down the road to get to the soccer game. And because we're in the early 2000s, things like GPS and Google Maps and all that stuff didn't exist. Well, they existed, but GPS was used by the military to drop bombs in Iraq, not for soccer moms to drive their kids to a game. So at a certain point, they got lost. And mom's like, okay, listen, we're going to pull over here. I'm going to look at the map, figure out where to go, figure out what road we're on. And they pull into the parking lot of an elementary school. So this is a weekend. The school's empty. There's another kid on the playground just kind of hanging out, but it's not really populated. It's not school in session or anything like that. So mom goes, tell you what, I'm going to park here. I'm going to look at this map. Ben, why don't you just hang out at the playground? It has like a jungle gym and all that. Well, Ben has something else in mind. Ben really has to go to the bathroom. There happens to be a porta potty nearby, and he goes, Mom, tell you what, I'll hit the slide in a second. First off, I got to go to the bathroom. So he goes to the porta potty, does his business, comes out, he's ready to climb on the jungle gym, do all the fun stuff on a playground, but then he notices something. He notices something that he can't remember really seeing before he went to the porta potty. In fact, if he'd seen this, he might have tried to hold it in a little bit longer and solve the mystery of what was going on. Because when he gets out of the porta potty, what he sees is a dragon. There's a dragon dancing around the school field. Now, before you get your hopes up, this wasn't a cool dragon like Smaug or anything from Wings of Fire. Not a dragon that would be on the heavy metal album cover or a Magic the Gathering card. No, it was one of those Chinese dragons. It was one of those dragons with kind of like the flat face. I don't like those. I just don't think they look spooky. They don't look scary. They don't look majestic. They're just kind of dorky looking. But it's you're like, well, Jason, it's still a dragon in the middle of a field. Who cares if it looks like an idiot? Well, here's the thing. It wasn't a real dragon either. Probably should have said that first. You're like, oh, Jason, you're just being nitpicking. And possibly a little insensitive, calling an entire culture's dragons dorky looking, but it wasn't even a real dragon. It was one of the suits. You know how during celebrations, you'll have these long dragon bodies, and you usually have like two people, and so it's like long, and like you have the front legs and the back legs, and they kind of dance around, and the head kind of moves, gets all up in your business. It's like that, and sometimes they have 3 people in them, so it has 6 legs, or 4 people in it, and it has 8 legs, or 5 people in it, has 10 legs. I can do the math all day long. So it was like that. It was a dragon costume that had 2 people in it. But it's still odd. Why in the middle of this school field, in the middle of the day when there's really no one out and about, is there 2 people wearing this dragon costume, this long dragon costume, and dancing around? So Ben says, you know what, Jungle Jim, Jungle Schmim. I'm going to go out and I'm going to see what those guys are up to in that dragon suit. Why are they dancing around? Mom, look, Ben says. Mom, look at that Chinese dragon dancing over there. And the mom looks over and she's like, well, that's kind of weird. Mom, let's go take a look at it. Let's go check it out. Well, okay, Mom puts the map back in the car. She knows where she's going to go now. Maybe this will be fun, she thinks. There's another boy at the playground. He's just kind of playing, and Ben goes, hey, buddy, let's go check out that dragon. Come over with us. And the kid goes, yeah, sure, I'll go check it out. And they start walking across this field. Now, none of these 3 people saw the dragon appear. They didn't see him walk in. They didn't see 2 guys putting on the suit in the parking lot. Just out of the blue, all of a sudden, this dragon is dancing around. As they get closer, though, Ben starts to realize some weird things about this. Weird things about this dragon that appeared out of nowhere, that has 2 people dancing. He sees 2 sets of legs, so he knows there's 2 people. But he looks at the face of this thing, and he keeps describing it as a clown lion. He goes, it was like the dragon suit, but you know how the Chinese dragons, they kind of have more of a lion type face. It's very flat. He said this one had that, but the makeup around the face was done like a clown's would be. It was very vibrant and bright with contrasting colors. It looked like a clown lion. That's how he kept referring to it. They walk up to this clown lion dragon thing, just kind of dancing there. And Ben goes, hey, how's it going? And the little dragon starts doing a little ditty, right? Kind of dancing around, moving its feet. Ben's like, okay, I get it. You've been dancing this whole time. Just answer a question. I get it, you can dance. And then Ben goes, hey, it's kind of weird. I've always wondered this about you guys. How does the dude in the back know what to do? Like, he can't see what's going on. You, up front, I'm assuming you can see out of some sort of eye hole and can breathe. The guy in the back is all just turning blue. He's like, oxygen, oxygen. And the guy in the front knows everything that he's doing, but how does the guy in the back know how to coordinate with you? How does he know what dance moves to do? And that's when, for the first time, the clown lion speaks and says, I'm only one person. And that doesn't make sense to Ben, because he can clearly see this costume is too long for simply one person to be in it. And two, there's another set of legs. He sees two sets of legs. So he asks the clown lion, he goes, do you mind if I look under? Do you mind if I look under you? And the clown lion goes, sure, take a look. So Ben bends down and he looks underneath the clown lion. And what he says, it's very interesting the way he describes this. He says that when I looked down, I saw the entire body was just one long piece of fabric underneath the clown lion, which is which is what I would expect, right? It's part of the costume. But when he looks down the way that he sees it, he realizes the way that it's moving, the way that it's connected, is there are not two people in that suit. In fact, from what he can tell, there's not even one person in that suit. Clown lion is doing this little dance. And Ben is completely bewildered by what he saw. This isn't a costume. This is a creature. It may be made of fabric, but this is not a costume. This is a thing. This is a living thing. And the look on his face is so, just confused that his mother can see that something is wrong. Ben's mother looks at him and she sees he's just kind of like, what in the world? The look on my face was shock and confusion, that when my mother saw that, she immediately bent down to look as well. Because he surmised, he said, quote, she probably thinks the dude has his dick out, unquote. She was that concerned that her son was exposed to some sort of perversion, that she bends down and she looks underneath to see what it confused and shocked her son so much. She bends down and she looks underneath the clown lion, this elongated body still moving around rhythmically. Ben, watching her reaction, can tell that his mother is horrified. What she saw chilled her to the bone. She couldn't explain it, but she knew they needed to leave. She tells her son Ben and the other boy who they just brought along She's hanging out at the playground. She's like, it's time to go. Boys, let's go. And they begin hurriedly walking back to the parking lot where Ben's car was. And when they get to the parking lot, the mom orders the boy. She doesn't know who this kid is, doesn't even know his name. She goes, you leave. You have to leave campus. Go home. Get out of here. And she made the other kid leave. She wasn't going to take off herself until that boy had left the school grounds. And then once he had, her and Ben got in the car and drove away. Ben asks his mom, you saw that, right? You saw, like, there wasn't anybody in the suit. What was that? And as his mom is driving away from the school, she goes, it was just a robot. It was a robot. To this day, Ben says, I don't know what that was. Definitely wasn't a robot. Wasn't a robot. Wasn't people. But other than that, I don't know what we saw that day. Super interesting story. You know what's funny is this is the third time we've gotten something from this list of weird childhood memories. I don't like to content farm on the paranormal board, but sometimes this stuff is just too good to pass up because I spend so much time on the export. I don't like to get all my stuff from there, but the first one was a kid who said that Freddy Krueger came out of his television set, and he was the only witness. The second one was about a kid who saw a superpowered homeless man invade his family's backyard and flip over a picnic table with one hand. In that story, as an adult, when he brings it up, his parents go, I don't remember that. That doesn't ring any bells. As his parents are sweating, they're like, oh, why does he keep bringing up that terrifying story from our past? This is interesting because it's a childhood memory that the mother does remember. That the mother saw that day, and she couldn't make heads or tails of it. She told a lie. He's like, it wasn't a robot. I mean, again, we're talking about something in the early 2000s. It would have had to have been a massive robot that could talk to him, could actually answer his questions. We have this entity, and really at the end of the day, that's almost all we can say about it. On the one hand, it reminded me of an old story we covered on the show, the story, and I'm sure a lot of you guys were thinking about this while I was saying it. It was an alien encounter with a being known as Sam the Sandown Clown. And he had a clownish face as well, and he interacted with these two children and kind of spoke in this very riddle-type way. It started off as a pretty obscure UFO story. Now it's becoming more popular, which is good because I like these stories to gain more traction. Very, very interesting story. You think, well, was this an alien? Was this... it's broad daylight. It's in a public area. This thing just appears and is dancing and they see it and they can't understand it. And I wonder if this is something where they look at it and they just can't conceive of what they truly saw, so their brain interprets it as felt. It interprets it as a fabric, as a costume. It's taking such an abstract thought and putting it in our world, our three-dimensional world, and the only way their brains could register it would be of a costume. A Chinese dragon costume. But what was really there was something undescribable. And that's the only way they could interpret it. And the way he describes it, when I had to read this a couple times, I said, well, isn't there always felt connecting it? Isn't it always so you can't really see underneath those suits? But he's like, no, it's not just that. It was just a really good costume. He could tell that it was not two men in a suit. It was one being. It was one entity. It was one thing. It was not a costume. One-off paranormal event. Broad daylight, multiple witnesses. It has a vague connection to another UFO story, so it might be alien. There's a lot of theories that the Nephilim, which are the fallen angels from the Old Testament, they appeared as clowns. Well, no, let me back that up. They had pale skin and red hair. And that is the reason why some people have a fear of clowns. It's because it's actually an ancestral memory to these red-haired, incredibly pale-skinned, demonic figures. Giants, really, and then oddly enough, when you find stories of giants around the world, a lot of, wherever it's at, could be Native Americans fighting them in Nevada. I'll put that episode in the show notes. It could be U.S. soldiers fighting them in Afghanistan. I'll put that episode in the show notes. They also all have red hair and pale skin. So is there something about the clown iconography which can kind of give us a clue as to what this is? Was it truly just a one-off event? This was a singular creature that existed in a singular point in time. But then even then it was acting like Two Men in a Costume in the sense that he was watching it dance, like people would dance during a celebration. Fascinating story. Really, really interesting. A lot of times when you look at these memories of kids, you know, we all have memories as kids that don't really make sense. That don't really make sense. I have that memory of being in my backyard and seeing a jumbo jet fly right overhead, like maybe 30 feet above my house. It never happened. It couldn't have happened. It would have destroyed the house. But I vividly remember seeing that, and I kind of at this point kind of chalk it up to a dream. You know, I must have just been dreaming. That's impossible. But when you have it where other people can remember it, then you can't say it was just a dream. They did experience something. What it was, we don't know. It's so unusual. We can kind of go, it might be this, it might be that. But middle of the day, school field, this thing appears out of nowhere. Again, no one saw it show up. And they all left. We don't know where it came from. We don't know where it went. We don't know what it was. And that mystery will endure until someone else experiences the clown lion. Fred, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world famous Carbonacopter. We are leaving behind this elementary school. Why don't you fly us all the way out to Pennsylvania? We're headed all the way out to Pennsylvania. This story starts in the late 60s, early 70s, but the ramifications of it continue to this day. We're about to meet a young mother. We don't have real names for these people, but we're about to meet this young mother. We'll call her Molly. And she loves the paranormal. She's been a fan of the paranormal, like most of us, for a long, long time. Usually starts in childhood. And that love of the mysterious, always trying to figure out what is in the dark corners of the world, can carry on for years or decades. Or it could be a lifetime love. And that's kind of where Molly finds herself. She loves the paranormal, specializing in ghosts. She loves stories of ghosts, and she would go to haunted locations. Basically, any place that even was rumored to have a ghost, you'd find Molly plotting to get in there. Haunted graveyard? Guys, let's go. Haunted morgue? Who's bringing the crowbar? That was what she loved the most, right? Was studying ghosts, and she would go to these haunted locations just to try to experience something. Now, she is a mother. She's a young mother, and she has a young son. We'll call him Jake. He's 7 years old, and he knows his mom really likes this ghost stuff. Honey, don't stay up too late. Mommy's going to be breaking into an abandoned cemetery tonight. Make sure you do your homework. He knows that his mom goes on these jaunts, goes on these paranormal expeditions. But one night, Molly comes home, and her son, even though he's so young, can tell, because kids are pretty insightful, right? He sees his mom come home, he sees her friends come into the house, and he realizes something. He picks up on something. They are all absolutely terrified. Molly tells her son, honey, I don't want to alarm you. I want to alarm you. You know about ghosts, right? Yeah, I do, Mom. Well, one or more of them may have followed us home. We could have went to anyone's house. We could have got a hotel room. But instead we came back here, Jake. We came back to you. We believe something followed us home. Which, again, there's ways to avert that. Let's stop at a Denny's. At least have a meal, right? Maybe the ghost will decide to hang out in the kitchen for a while. They come back home, and Jake's heard all of this ghost stuff. This is nothing new to him. 2 weeks later, after this ghost hunt gone bad, Molly was sleeping on the couch when she awakes in the middle of the night. She clearly hears the sound of a woman crying. And she hears the sound coming from the basement. She gets up off the couch and she walks down into the basement. She can still hear this crying woman somewhere down there. She's walking around the basement. Suddenly, the sobbing turns to screaming. Panicked, frenzy, screaming. Molly begins looking around the darkness of the basement. I mean, she might have turned the light on at this point, but Molly begins looking around the basement to try to find the source of the screaming. It feels like it's coming from all around her. She's looking this way, she sees nothing. She looks this way, nothing. She looks and she sees her reflection. She turns and she looks at a basement window and she sees her own reflection, and that is when she realizes she is the one screaming. Molly took off, running up the stairs of the basement. As she leaves it behind, she hears the sound of a woman laughing coming from the basement. I do want to stop here and say there is an interesting connection. We have a story that's happened before. It was actually a true crime story. One of the police officers that was first on the scene of the Jeffrey Dahmer case. He said, I walked into they knew nothing about this guy. It was just like, they were just searching the place because some guy said that there's some crazy stuff going on up there. And the police officer, one of the officers said, I opened up a drawer in the bedroom and all of a sudden I heard someone screaming as loud as they could. And then I realized I was the one screaming. What had happened was he opened up the dresser drawer and there were human body parts in there. And it shocked him so badly he heard the screams and he didn't know it was himself. So that can happen. That doesn't even really need a paranormal component to it. But think about the intense fear that officer, who's obviously dealt with car crashes and fatalities and gunshot victims and everything like that, what image would horrify him to the point where he would scream outside of his own body? He didn't even recognize the scream. It was so removed from his ordinary existence. Imagine what she must have experienced, Molly must have seen in that basement as well, that created that level of horror. She heard the screaming. She didn't even know it was coming from herself. Now, obviously, all this screaming wakes Jake up. And Molly tells Jake, oh my God, son, you won't believe what just happened to me. Now, listen, here's the thing. I love ghosts. I love the paranormal. There are filters you need when dealing with kids. I'm not saying you don't say monsters don't exist, because they clearly do. Yesterday's episode had a Spider-Woman monster. This episode had a Chinese lion monster. Monsters do exist, but you don't have to run upstairs and tell your son, oh my God, there's a crying woman in her basement, and then she laughed at me. I was screaming so bad. The things that followed me home, Jake, followed you. They're in your house too. They're all around us. She's really dumping all of this stuff on Jake. Isn't there a term for it? It's called like trauma dumping. I'm not saying you have to lie to the kid, but you don't have to tell him that you are now demonically possessed. Because that's what Molly tells Jake. She goes, I believe I've been possessed by demons, Jake. Me, your mother, the person who, after you go to bed and you have a very early bedtime, the person who roams around the house full of knives and sharp implements. The one person in this house who's physically stronger than you in every single way. I, Jake, have been possessed by one or more demons that have followed me home. We thought they were ghosts. That was optimistic back then. She tells him all of this stuff. In fact, he almost becomes an unwilling co-conspirator in all of the events that are about to unfold. The very next day, Molly takes Jake to this church, a church that they had never gone to before. They weren't particularly religious. And this wasn't like a church. I mean, I hate using terminology like that because every religion kind of stands on its own. I don't like saying, oh, well, this religion's legit, but those guys across the street, cuckoo. You know, that's always so dumb. It's a stupid argument to have because all religions are a leap of faith. You have to accept certain things. They don't seem rational. That being the case, Jake says this felt more like a cult than a church. Jake goes, she took me out to this old ramshackle church that was a church and then a marijuana farm. Right? So, I mean, listen, it may not be a church, but it's probably pretty fun. It's this marijuana farm and this church, and it was up in the hills. Jake, he's 7 years old. He goes into this church. Right when they walk in the door, the minister walks up to Molly and puts his hands on her forehead. She immediately falls to the ground and begins snarling. She's rolling around. She's lashing out at people, trying to scratch them, trying to bite them. This scared Jake so badly he ran out of the church. And he's stuck in this situation. He's just a boy. His mother is either possessed by demons or believes that she is. Both of them are incredibly dangerous situations for a kid to be in because either she is possessed by demons or she's suffering from severe mental health issues. But the minister, whatever the case was, recognized it right away. There was something wrong with her. He walked up and put his hands on her and she collapsed and began convulsing like they didn't want to be touched by this minister. Like whatever was in her body was trying to repel that. Now, they kept going back to that church. That wasn't the only time they went. It's not like he exorcised the demons from her body on day one. They kept going back to that church, and Jake kept being brought back to this church, and the more times he goes, listen, it was really a crazy experience to go to. I mean, luckily, if you got a little bored, you could just saunter out back, roll up a doobie. But he said it was one of those churches where they were handling serpents. They got a serpent in each hand, and they're like, look at me, the Lord protects me from these serpents. These serpents aren't biting me. These would kill you. They throw them at you. You're all, I believe. It's too late. You're dead. Minister picks him back up. He goes, look, I can handle these serpents. They won't bite me. It was one of those types of churches. He says the people were speaking in tongues. There were miracles being performed. People were being healed. My mom kept rolling around on the ground. My mom kept trying to get these demons exorcised from her, but it just never worked. We went there for 3 years, Jake said. For 3 years, and eventually, this should show you how bad this situation is. The minister said, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here anymore. The minister kicked them out of the church. Which, my father was a Southern Baptist minister growing up. It takes a lot. It's not impossible to get kicked out of a church, but it takes a lot. And she was able to meet that threshold where the church where they handle snakes, they said, no. You're either too crazy to keep coming here, too distracting, right? We do fit a little bit of prayer in between handling snake. Maybe that's why the snakes don't bite them, because they're always so stoned. The whole church is hotboxed. You're either too distracting, too dangerous, or listen, we've done everything we can for you on a spiritual side. We think you might actually be suffering from a real mental illness. We can't treat you. But whatever the case was, the minister kicked them out of the church. And that is, while not impossible, very, very rare. But the church wasn't the only game plan that Molly had. Molly was also doing seances at her house, trying to open up communication to whatever evil spirits happened to lurk there. That didn't really help. I mean, the thing is that when you look at the spiritual, I know there are people who use seances and mediums and things like that. Here's the thing. It could make things better, possibly, if it was a positive spirit and you were helping it, say, move on to the other side, or helping it reconcile its death. But with an evil spirit, it just seems to aggravate things. That's always the trick with like Ouija boards or seances or things like that. If you know exactly who you're talking to, and you don't always know, it could really make things worse. Didn't necessarily make things worse for Molly and Jake, but it didn't help either. Every couple of months, Molly would have someone come out and bless the house, and just things were terrible. And you go, well, Jason, okay, so really all that you've said so far is that mom's screaming in the basement. What other horrible things are happening in this house? Well, let's take a look at that. Because what we have is, mom's rolling around in the church, right? She's trying to attack people there. Was she doing that at home? What was the paranormal activity at home? You're saying it's not getting any better after years of this. This has been going on for years at this point. What's interesting is that we don't have a lot, or really any, as far as I could tell, hauntings that Molly herself was undergoing. She believed that she was possessed by demons. But Jake, the one who posted this story online underneath the name Enthusiastic Sinner, which will play a part coming up, it's a very interesting username, he talks about what he was going through, because this post was from his point of view. He said he would have things like his bed would be violently shaking. And I'll be honest, it's so funny, I can't believe it's taken this long in the run of the podcast, 6 years and 1,340 some odd episodes. That was actually one of my big childhood fears. I don't know where I got it from, but when I was a kid for years and years and years, and every so often it'll still pop up, I'm always afraid that when I'm laying down, my bed will start shaking. I guess that's the scene. I've never seen the movie The Exorcist. The only thing I can think of is when I was a kid, someone had mentioned that scene in the movie. Someone had been like, oh, the movie The Exorcist, where the bed shakes. Like, that was the most notable part of the movie. I was like, oh, if that's the worst thing that happens, I can totally watch that. But I remember, I think, ever since I was a kid, I had a fear of laying in bed and all of a sudden my bed start violently shaking. But I don't know where I got that fear from. It used to petrify me as I was going to sleep. I was like, oh, I hope my bed doesn't shake tonight. Never did. But that was always a fear of mine. Well, Jake was living out my fear. His bed would violently shake from time to time. Also, sometimes when he would walk past mirrors in his home, for a split second, he would see the reflection of faces into the mirror. Huh? What? Turn around. That, again, I think is a kind of a universal fear. That one where you're looking in the mirror and you're brushing your teeth, and then you look down, and then you look up and there's like a woman standing behind you, her face is all cut up, or like Bloody Mary, or just a normal looking ghost. He could have a business suit on, it would still be terrifying. You're like, ah. I think that's a common fear. I think that a lot of that comes from a kind of eeriness with mirrors. I think a lot of that comes from horror movies. Mirrors are eerie. Bathrooms are eerie. Right when you wake up is eerie. Right when you go to bed is eerie. Everything's eerie. And while you're brushing your teeth, your bed's shaking. You're like, oh no. The creepiest of all, I'd say, Jake said that every so often he would look out his bedroom window and he would see people staring into his room. Probably there to watch the bed shake. They're like, oh, did you hear? Mom's selling tickets to see her kid get tormented by spirits. So if you wait for the second act, he's going to brush his teeth soon. He goes, I would see people looking in my window. But his bedroom was on the 3rd floor of the house. So, I mean, it's like whatever this thing is going out of its way to be terrifying. And that really shook him to his core. Because he knows, I mean, obviously, if you lived on the ground floor and you saw someone looking in your window, you're going to think it's a pervert or something. But if you're on the 3rd floor of your house and someone's looking in, multiple people, right? I imagine it's a crowd each time. 3 or 4 people. I mean, again, even if it was just one, you're like, oh, it's only one person floating around outside of my house. Oh, I'm good. But 3 or 4, terrifying. He said those things are happening to him. Now, these hauntings, these visitations, these visions lasted for around a few years until they moved out. Molly and Jake packed up, left behind Pennsylvania, and moved to Ohio. And after that, the experiences stopped. Jake ended his post by saying, quote, I had night terrors every night, so I don't know if these things really happened. I mean, obviously his mom was rolling around in the church. He's like, oh, it's time for church. I'm going to take a nap. Smoked too much weed before the service. There were things that happened. He was talking about the bed shaking and the people floating around outside of his house. Quote, I had night terrors every night, so I don't know if these things really happened or if I was just a terrified child with a wild imagination and a mentally ill mother. I hear about people going ghost hunting all the time, and I don't know why anyone would want to take the chance of experiencing anything like this if it's real. Unquote. So he is kind of at that point. And here's the thing, listen. It would be much easier to say my mom was mentally ill and all of that stuff was just because I was constantly terrified and I had a mother who had severe mental illness. In a way, that's more comforting. This is tough. This is tough, right? Because you can argue, no, it's not. I think really it comes down to thinking something that is controllable and explainable versus something that is uncontrollable and unexplainable. He can't decide. He didn't make a choice to have a mentally ill mother, but you would feel more comfortable going to bed at night if you thought, oh, those years of terrifying visions I had, that was just because I had night terrors. There were no ghosts. The place wasn't haunted. What's interesting, what kind of works against that is that if that was the case when they moved, this activity would have continued. Because his mother wasn't like, finally, Ohio, I'm no longer mentally ill, guys. I left behind Pennsylvania. It would have continued. Because his mother did continue to be mentally ill after they left Pennsylvania and went to Ohio. So, crazy story, right? He's totally right. We've talked about this before on the show. I say people go ghost hunting. They don't know what could follow them back. I had something follow me back on a ghost hunt before. I'll put that episode in the show notes because I've talked about it quite a few times. But I encountered this entity that I called the Blue Boy. And he did haunt me all over the place. My grandma's house where I was living at the time, work. Really, really was... making it hard to be a pizza delivery guy when at any time a boy risen from the grave, glowing blue, might pop out around the corner, making me drop a pizza right into my mouth. The boss is like, hey, Jason, and they called, they said they didn't get their pizza. I was like, oh yeah, I was about to deliver it to him, but I was so scared, I just gobbled it up. It's interesting, though, to note, he does say that, like we've talked about that before in the past, when you go on these ghost hunts, you don't know what's going to follow you back. He also says, I don't know if what I experienced was real or if I was just under a constant state of stress because I had a mentally ill mother. So maybe none of the things I experienced was real, but his mother really did come up out of the basement and say I was screaming, and then there was the woman laughing. The mother really did take him to the church, and he saw his mother roll around on the ground and all of that stuff. Which would, they go, Jason, well, that's because she's mentally ill. It's not because an actual demon possessed her. But again, I think it's interesting that the phenomenon stopped when they left this house in Pennsylvania. What's interesting, too, and I kind of want to wrap it up like this, because I've talked about this a couple of times on the podcast as well, but I thought this was an interesting example of the legacy. Let's put on our conspiracy caps and say this was a demonic attack. Something did follow her home after a ghost hunt. Because he never said that his mother was mentally ill before that night. She just really liked the paranormal. Like, there was a point where his mother started talking about ghosts and demons and being inside of her, and we have to go to church. We got to go to church, son. Otherwise, the demons are going to take control of me. He knows there was a before and after to that. And while mental illness can strike like that, let's put on our conspiracy caps and say that this was actually a demonic attack. What's interesting is this became the family's legacy. Because like I do when people post on Reddit, one of the benefits of Reddit is I can look through people's posting history and I can see what else they've talked about. And it can a lot of times paint a very interesting picture about some of these people because they're talking on all these different forums. We have Jake. In a totally different post in a totally different forum, he talks about not just his own childhood and doesn't mention any of the ghosts and the demon stuff. What he does is he goes, listen, I grew up in a household where crime was king. My mother was a thief who was mentally ill. He states that right off the bat. Listen, my mom was nuts. She was a thief. She dated a thief, a professional car thief. And they taught him how to steal. They would make him go out and steal things for them and bring them back. And it was just this constant, very stressful life. A life of crime. A life that he wanted no part of. But he's in this household where it is not only normalized, it's celebrated. He goes, I was raised by alcoholic drug addicts. And as I got older, I became an alcoholic drug addict. This is a horrible situation that he's been put in. He's following in the footsteps of his mother. But his life continues on. Jake ends up getting a girl pregnant, and he's going to be a father. And he goes, I am not going to raise my kid in the same way that my mother raised me. So he gets clean. The cycle is broken. Unfortunately, the mother of his child, his fiance, is injured during a horrendous car accident, ends up getting a traumatic brain injury from it, and is no longer able to help raise their son. So this responsibility falls on Jake, while he's also fighting for custody against the mother's parents want custody of Jake's son, and it's just taken a toll on him. He really believes that he can help this little guy grow up. But Jake's son eventually descends into a life of alcoholism and drug addiction. Despite Jake's best efforts, he watches his son become a violent drug addict. And Jake becomes scared of his own child. Jake's son, at this point, gets a girl pregnant. This has gone on for years and years and years now. It's a dynasty. Jake is about to be a grandfather, and he thinks, okay, this is what got me right. Once I realized I was going to have a son, I had to grow up and get straight. Maybe this will be the catalyst for my own son to seek help, to get better, to quit the drugs and the alcohol. Nope. It doesn't. He goes, my son is a dad. He's pretty much an absentee father. He spends most of his time doing drugs. I'm scared of my own son. I had to get a restraining order against him because he keeps breaking into my house and stealing stuff. And if there's nothing to steal, he trashes the place. To this day, he's still writing about this. To this day, I'm terrified of my own son. I don't know what he's capable of. I do know that he's so angry and violent and just lost in his own mind, his own drug-addled mind, that I don't feel safe. And if I'm not there, he will take out his wrath on all my personal property. Everything I have has been destroyed or stolen at this point. I don't even get to see my grandson. I'm just stuck. I'm stuck in this existence. And I found that so intriguing. Sad, obviously. It's super sad. You know what drugs and alcohol can do to a family. And there's two ways we can look at this. Obviously, we throw on the conspiracy cap. We can see this as a continuation of a demonic infestation. We can see Jake being raised in this house where this evil spirit was, and it took control of his mother. And despite the fact that Jake stopped seeing paranormal events, doesn't mean that the mother ever got rid of the demon. And that darkness almost swallowed Jake whole, as he also, at a very young age, began to experiment with drugs and alcohol. Eventually, he got his life straight, but it seems like everything else, every other member of his family, from his fiancée to his own child, have just suffered such horrible fates. The story of his son is still not yet totally written. His son can also turn things around. But where Jake's at right now, currently, he's scared of his own child. And that just must feel so defeating. And you could say that that is a demonic presence going on. But stepping back from the whole demonic thesis, as far as this goes, saying that all of this stuff is demonically related, it could just be the fact that these are the cycles that sometimes people find themselves in. A horrible reminder of how humans can behave towards each other, even if there is no demon involved, even if there is no darkness involved. You just have a story of a boy who was raised by a mentally ill mother who tormented him, made him terrified every single moment of the day. And then, even when you remove the story about the woman being possessed by demons, she was a thief who taught her child to be a thief, who raised her child in a home of drug addicts. So it's not shocking that he became a drug addict himself. It wasn't inevitable, but it's not shocking. And despite the fact that he was able to get his life together, he has a child who descends into alcoholism and drug addiction and is now a violent man who is not only scaring his own father, but is laying the groundwork for his son, Jake's grandson, to not have a great shot at life either. It's fascinating, and it's troubling. It truly is troubling to see a story like this. It would be really easy to chalk all of this stuff up to demons. I do believe the first half of the story, the mother did get possessed or something followed her home. I do think the first part of that story is supernatural. But they leave Pennsylvania for Ohio. Everyone's given a fresh start. The demonic oppression has left, and yet she continues to be not a great mom, not a great role model, not a great person to have for Jake to be around. Even without the demons, even without the darkness, even without the faces looking in his bedroom late at night, Jake still lived in a chaotic household of man's own design, not that of Lucifer's. And even with the odds stacked against him, he tried his best, and he continues to try his best, but he is terrified of his own son. He has a restraining order against his own son. It would be easy to chalk it up and say this is the power of demons. This family has never left the demonic oppression of that night when she went out for that ghost hunt and something followed them home. But it's just more complicated than that, I believe. I think this is just the way life rolls sometimes. And I hope that Jake finds his peace. I hope his son gets better and his son begins to work towards, coming out of drug addiction. And Jake is able to reestablish a relationship with not just his son, but his grandchild. I hope all of these things happen. And it would be great if a priest could show up and exorcise the demons of the home and bless the place, and all of a sudden this perfect peace falls across this family and everyone hugs each other because all of the evil spirits that have lurched out of hell are banished, and instantly this family is cured. But this is a story that'll only end after long, hard steps towards recovery. This story will not end with a simple blessing by a priest. Because humans are complicated. Humans make mistakes. Humans make tragic choices against their best interests a lot of times. I wish someone could wave a wand and fix Jake's life like that. But real life isn't a fairy tale. Real life isn't a clear-cut battle between good and evil, the forces of light, versus the forces of darkness. Real life is ugly, messy, and scary. And sometimes, despite our best efforts, there is no happy ending. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day. I'm glad you listened to it today.